Thanks for joining me on this video. Today I'm going to be talking about how to select the right frog. I just want to say real quick, thank you to those of you who are supporting the channel through your subscription. I really do appreciate it. Let's get into it. So when I think about typical frog fishing for bass, I think about 4 different categories of a frog. I think about a walking frog, a popping frog, a flapping frog, and a soft body frog. The first 3 are a hollow body frog, and I think they are a little bit different than that soft plastic frog that we'll talk about a little bit later. But those are basically the 4 different frogs. So I'm going to show you those 4 different frogs, and then we'll break them down. First up, we're talking about a walking frog. I'm going to show you basically a standard frog in my book, which is the Booyah Pad Crasher. This is a standard walking frog. It has that boat nose that's going to give you that walking action as you retrieve it back to you through twitching. Next up is going to be your popping frog. This happens to be a Berkley swamp lord. This has that concave mouth that's going to spit water as you bring it back. Now you can twitch this, walk this, pop this frog on the retrieve. And this is basically your standard popping hollow body frog. All right, third up is going to be a flapping frog, something like this. This is Essential Series Flapping Frog 65 from Spro. As you can see, this has the flapping legs right here on the bottom of this frog. This is a hollow body frog, so I consider this a little bit of a hybrid frog because you can actually pause this on the retrieve. Because it's hollow body, you can actually let it just sit there for a little bit. You can straight retrieve it. You can walk it or pop it back to you. I would consider this a hybrid hollow body frog. All right, last up is going to be a soft plastic frog, something like this. This is a Rage Tail Rage Toad by Strike King. This is a soft body toad that, in my opinion, is great for mats, but is a little bit questionable when it comes to durability. You're probably only going to catch a few bass on this or hang it up in some vegetation before these legs rip. So soft plastic frogs, in my opinion, are very specific to conditions, and we'll talk about that in just a second. All right, the number one thing in selecting the right frog for me comes down to the size of the frog. Not so much that I'm trying to match bait fish as I'm trying to get a standard size frog that's going to give me a good, consistent, and accurate cast every single time. When I'm talking about a standard size frog, I'm talking about something kind of like the Booyah Pad Crasher, something that is going to come in about a 2.5 inch, half-ounce frog, something like this. I would consider that a standard size frog. For my frog rod setup, that's going to give me a consistent and accurate cast every single time. The importance of an accurate cast and the consistency of that cast, especially when fishing a frog, to me is more important than the color of the frog. I think that accurate cast, presenting that frog in a natural presentation and a very tight or small target is what gets that bass to react. That's what flips the switch and turns that bass on and is going to kill that frog. I think that's more important than the color or maybe even the action of the frog. So for me, number 1 is going to be size. Probably the second is going to be color. Now for me, I like something that's going to be a dark back, and if I'm fishing something that is not just a solid color, I want that gradient to come around and I want it to have highlights. So I want something that has maybe a dark back, maybe some orange or some red or some blues, yellows, maybe even something like that. But I want something that's going to be a gradient to the belly of that frog, something that maybe is going to resemble a bluegill, a sunfish, something like that. Now, if I'm talking about a solid frog or a solid color of frog, then I want something more like white or maybe even a bone color frog. I like these 2 colors when it comes to solid frogs. If I'm throwing a flapping frog, I usually choose something in a white or a solid black. The next thing up for selecting the right frog for me is going to be the action. Now, I think the action it comes in a little bit behind color and then obviously size of the frog, because there's been many times when I've gotten bit on the frog before I've even moved that frog. So right on the first cast, right when it hits the water. And that's why I think accuracy is so important. And then I think color is important because you need those bass to see that frog. So depending on the visibility and clarity, like we talked about, is going to be next for me. But then that action. And now the action of the frogs, depending on what you go with, you can fish those back to you several different cadences, which gives you different action. And then obviously you can walk a frog, whether it's a popping frog or a walking frog, you can walk that back to you depending on how fast you go. You can either have it disturb the surface like a popping frog, or you can walk it back and be kind of subtle. The flapping frog is a little bit different, but even the hollow body floating flapping frog allows you to bring that frog back in a cadence that is similar to a popping frog. So again, it's going to be size, color, and then action on those frogs. The soft body frog or the soft plastic frog is going to be a little bit different category altogether for me, and that's because those don't float. But maybe you are fishing a soft plastic frog that does float, something like this, like a goat, like a Z-Man goat's toad, and this is a very durable plastic, and this is just on an extra wide gap hook. But let me say this about this toad. I think this toad shines around cover where there's not a whole lot of vegetation. I think this toad, my experience with it, when it comes across vegetation, is a little too light. So it tends to somersault or cartwheel over vegetation versus sitting down in that vegetation. However, this toad does do great around docks or laydowns or cover that you want to pause the retrieve on a soft plastic frog. All right, so real quick, let's talk about brands. Let me say this, I'm not sponsored. I'm not a brand elitist. I don't have an affiliation with any of the brands that I show you guys on my channel. And the benefit or the advantage for you guys with that is that I'm going to give you my honest opinion about it and about the equipment that I use. I'm going to share the good, the bad, and the ugly with you guys on all of these, and I'm not holding anything back. So with that said, let me share with you guys some of my favorite frogs that I like to use. I'm not going to show you all of them because that could just take an entire episode, and maybe I will do that one day. But let me share a couple of good brands with you, or the brands that I like to use based off of a couple of different criterias. So first off is going to be that standard frog that I really like, the Booyah Pad Crasher. This comes in a standard size that I think is really great to throw. I think that 2.5 inch, half-ounce frog is a great starting point for anyone, but that's where I like to start, and that gives me a really consistent and accurate cast. It's also a great frog to skip into a lot of vegetation. Next up is going to be based off of weight, size, and color. This one, when I'm looking for a bone color frog, is hard to beat. This is a Filthy Frog by Ketchco. This one comes in a 2.5 ounce, 5/8 ounce frog. This one, to me, is really hard to beat when it comes to that bone color. All right, next up on the list of frogs that I like is going to be that Berkley Swamp Lord. This one comes in a 2/3 ounce, 2.6 inch frog. The one thing that I really like about this frog is the body material. This is an ultra soft body material. This one already comes out of the box pretty much ready for action. It's not, I would not call this frog stiff or rigid at all. They did a really good job with making these backs soft to deploy these hooks. So right out of the gate, you don't need to boil this frog or use a heat gun on this frog. It's pretty soft right out of the box. And I do like that it is a 2/3 ounce frog. So that's going to give you a frog that's able to cast a mile. All right, so we've touched on the criteria of what I think are where you would start for selecting the right frog. But I want to talk about a little bit about fishing these frogs in different types of cover. When I think about different types of cover that a frog is perfect to throw in, I think about cover where that's going to be the only bait that maybe you can either get in there, the only bait that you can get in there and then elicit some action on it in a very small amount of space, or the only bait that's going to give you the correct presentation to get a reaction strike from a bass. But breaking down cover, to me, when I'm throwing a frog, I look at for the smaller pockets on whatever cover I'm fishing. So think about, say, maybe like a tree, a laydown. A tree has several different ways that you can attack it. You know, you can attack it with a spinner bait, a jig, a Texas rig, or other baits, even a crankbait. But I think that frog gives you an advantage of throwing that bait into a pocket of that tree. So think about like where a branch and that trunk comes together and maybe has a little bit of room in between that tree and the surface of the water. That's a really nice spot to throw a frog. It's going to also present this frog in an area that would be a natural place for a frog to sit anyways. Think about that kind of an area. So breaking down cover is going to break it down into pockets. All right, last up is going to be when to fish a frog. If you're talking about the entire season of fishing, I fish a frog pretty much throughout the entire season. I look at for opportunities to throw that bait and where that bait's going to shine, whether it's presenting something in a natural way or is going to be hard to get any other bait in and out of that cover. So let's break that down even further into the time of day. You know, a lot of people fish frogs early in the morning, evenings, but they really kind of forget about the middle of the day. I like to fish the frog with the light or with the shade lines. What that means is in the morning you have shade everywhere or low light conditions. Same thing going on in the evening. And you tend to get a good feeding time for frogs, but during the middle of the day is also a really good time to fish a frog if you follow those shade lines. So where you have trees that are overhanging or long grass, lily pads, docks, things where the shade is going to be vertically underneath that structure, bass tend to gather in those shade lines, and that's also a great opportunity to fish a frog and get bit by a big bass. So if you follow those shade lines, you'll also be following where bass tend to gather and look for something to eat. And a frog is a perfect opportunity to present something in a natural way in and underneath that cover. Well, hopefully this has helped you guys to select the right frog for the right kind of conditions. And I really do appreciate you guys sticking with me in this video. I know it's a little bit longer, but if you haven't done so, go ahead and hit that subscription button. I really do appreciate your support. If you guys are interested in other top water lures that I use, check out the next video that's coming up. I really do appreciate you guys' time. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have making it for you. Until next time, thanks for watching. We'll see you again.